So these are just incredibly rich and energizing and exciting series of works and thoughts and inspirations. And I have some questions for you, and then we'll also have some time to open it up. But I wanted to start with you, Theresa. You brought up a really interesting development that we're seeing across Indian country of this idea of skipping generations, right? Where you have great grandparents or grandparents who are culturally practicing or language speaking, then the parents, and then another generation, and then another generation actually going back and regenerating. And I would like to know more about what compelled you to make that make that jump back in through basketry, and what was your motivation to do that?
Okay, sure. Thank you for that question. Am I on? I actually had begun work at my tribe right after the Maine Indian land claims, 1980.
Yeah.
And as the geologist, I just earned a master's degree in economic geology there. I got very distracted by the basketry and the people there because, they were still weaving, but the basket makers were having a hard time getting access to the resource, which was really what I was working in the Department of Natural Resources, which was really what drew my attention to it in the first place. And then, I just have to say I enjoyed learning basketry with my teacher and, just began this long journey, which is, too long a story for here. But in answer to your question, had some meetings with some of the elders to talk about what could be done. And the four tribe, the elders from the four tribes decided to work together, which was kind of unprecedented there. But, it was so prolific in art form in our tribes there, and it wasn't gone. It was still being practiced. And I have to say, today, with all the awards and the high prices that we receive for our baskets, is still the heroes of those generations, from who were practicing the basketry, who were the first teachers in our group to keep the art form going, that I admire the most.
Yeah, thank you. And Linley, I was really fascinated by how you're looking at these motifs, these spirals. You actually see them certainly, actually with Wabanaki, that the spiraling, but also Haudenosaunee, of course, and throughout, and especially this idea about carrying it, right, wearing it, like intergenerationally, the fact that it's moving on the body, and then you're moving it into other kinds of art forms. And what are you looking at carrying with that, with that motif, that spiral, and the sky dome? What is it conveying for you?
For me, it conveys a multitude of things. And so for me personally, artistically, in regards to my personal worldview, vision, and how I creatively see the world, oftentimes you see those swirl patterns in many things. It might be wind, it might be a leaf, it might be a pool of water, it might be something in the sky. In referencing our historical interpretation of our seeing these things within our worldview, within our Gaiweo, Ganodaya was taken up on the path to the sky world by two messengers, and as he was taking up on this path, every so often they would stop and they would point in a direction and they would ask him to tell him what he saw. And at one point in time, they point off in a direction from the sky world path, and his response is he sees this swirl in the sky, and they refer to it basically as the movement of the winds here on Earth. And so we've always understood this natural interpretation of this swirl pattern. And I like to reference it as a life-giving force for us in our recognition of the fact that in our dances and in our ceremonies, everything is done in a counterclockwise direction, specifically to recognize a life-giving force. And so it's something that has always been culturally inherent to us in regards to our cultural identity and how what our worldview perception is. And I just want to be able to reassert that back as an integral part of our worldview, included in my artistic expressive language on a contemporary level.
Oh, just a definition point. not everybody here knows what gawio is. Could you define that?
Gaiweo is referred to as the good words or good messages, or the Code of Handsome Lake, because Handsome Lake, whose Seneca chief's name was Ganodayo, which means Handsome Lake, basically translated. And Handsome Lake was a visionary and a prophet in the early 1900s. I like to say what he did was he basically took our old religion, which from a European perspective, and especially a Christian's perspective, wasn't necessarily embraced as being something healthy. And basically what Ganodayo did was he made reformations or introduced reformations to our original and old religion. And so now what we follow is Gaiweo. And Tonawanda, my home community, is considered historically the capital of the Gaiweo religion, because Handsome Lake, before he passed away in the early 1800s, was living and was preaching in Tonawanda.
Thank you. And Porfirio, just talking about, we were talking a little bit earlier, because being Zapotec, you live in California, and you have this really deep, ancient, ancestral practice that's moved forward, and it moved forward with you when you were outside of your homeland. And there's so many people from Mexico, from Central America, South America. They're moving, emigrating, fleeing for all kinds of reasons. And I'm just wondering about, how you feel about the connections back home and having that practice that's so rooted in a place, but practicing it somewhere else.
Well, thank you for anybody here? Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. For me, it has been such a great journey. As I mentioned, I started weaving when I was 12 years old, and since I remember, I've always been part of this tradition. And just like in many brothers and sisters around the world, and I think human being, we've always migrated. And in my case, that's what happened when I was 18 years old, following a brother to Ventura, California. And, that I came to appreciate being away. I came to appreciate deeply my tradition, and looking at the tradition, different perspective. As an immigrant here, I came to learn to adapt and submerge myself into the culture, into the language. So my first language is Zapotec. I didn't learn Spanish till I was 5 or 6 years old. And when I came to U.S., I speak no English whatsoever. But so that's the idea of learning. Now I'm part of this great, country that I, proudly also, U.S. citizen. But at the same time, I'm a native Zapotec. So being away, as I mentioned, it has helped me tremendously to reconnect with my culture. I didn't saw my parents or my family. I didn't go back home for 10 years. So when I went back home, I really start to noticing what a wonderful culture, and I'm so lucky to be part of it. At the same time, knowing or seeing the weaving art form, I really just connected with that. I really find my way within weaving again, and I understood. I think that was not only a gift, but I feel like it was my call. So I started weaving, and since then I really try to create something that could represent us, that could define what us, that gives us self-identity as a Zapotec, as someone a Teotiteco, someone from Teotitlán del Valle, to represent this wonderful culture and to hopefully share it with the world. So it has been an interesting journey for me to make that transition between one country to another. So now I have the ability to go back and forth and spend a lot of time back home. And we're a team now with my parents, my sisters, and the rest of my siblings. So we come together and create each piece, but with a different perspective. It's more an art form, It's more a way to find ourselves and to express and honor my ancestors through each piece we create.
Thank you, Maura. This idea about home and like you carrying home in the body, right? I mean, it's this incredible embodied work that you do. And I think, we all felt it as we did with many of the pieces, but there's something in the movement that is quite literally stirring. And the idea about creating safety in that movement. And at the same time, you're in a very contemporary urban space, very intertribal blended space, both personally and within your community. And I'm just, curious, as you've reached back into this really like deep time, is there anything that feels different in the movement with that really deep ancestral kind of line or shape that's different from work that you've been doing up till now?
Thank you for that question. Well, the first thought I have is that this has been really overwhelming in a good way. The whole process, at one point I even got, dizzy looking at these ancient and these old things. I came in expecting, because the things that I'm looking at, the materials, the artwork, are made by the ancestors of the Caddo peoples, of the Osage peoples, Kaw peoples, Ponca, also of Quapaw peoples. And so I've actually contacted elders from some of those communities and told them that I was coming up here and will also be doing presentations when I get back. But I didn't expect to find such movement in the work that I was looking at, and also that the things were so central to a lot of indigenous people in the region of the Midwest, in the Southeast, and also, throughout the region. And so a lot of the gorgets and also the ornaments that people would wear in their ears, they're these symbols that are based on wind, some of the same things that Linley was talking about. They have they're people in action. So a lot of the imagery I've been looking at are people in action. And so I am already seeing formations that are at the same time based on these ancient things, but completely relevant to us today, because we're doing portions of them today without even knowing about these ancient roots. So when you have a story behind movement, it makes it all the more powerful. If you do, something like that with your hand, with intention, then people look, because it's so powerful. So I think this connection to the movement and the pieces, to the lines, to the design, has really inspired me, and I'm actually very excited to start sharing and working with these elements.
Thank you. I mean, I just have to say that I feel like the IQ in this room just went up after you all presented. I just feel so much smarter. So I want to thank you. I do want to open this up to questions from the audience. Questions, comments, points, if anybody has anything they want to say. Yeah. Do I need to repeat for the webcast? Yeah. Or actually, Cynthia can repeat for the webcast. Cynthia Fodor can back. Oh, yeah. Sorry. She was, yeah. Sorry. Thanks.
My question to all of the artists was, what was it like, this experience of coming together as a group, even though you come from very different communities and come and live very intensely with each other and with the collections and perhaps with colleagues here at the museum? And how does that impact your experience here, and how does that impact you in the future in the way that you do your work?
Well, I've been really inspired by the rest of the cohort, in particular, just like their energy level and even, there's a little difference in our ages and our art genres, and it's just been really exciting, kind of re-inspiring me to be true to my own art, but at the same time, do some exploratory work. And I don't know, it always helps to network with other artists, share connections, and find out, about what's going on, in their part of the world. And then certainly with the Smithsonian staff, it's been like an incredible learning experience and an honor, to learn about, our cultures and through their lens and through our ancestors' lenses. And it's just really been an all-around beautiful experience.
I actually was thinking about this, so I'm glad that you asked this. I have really enjoyed working with all of these talented and beautiful spirits, and also have learned something. So I was just thinking from Porfirio, I am pretty sure that the wool that is considered traditional kind of southeastern red trade wool is red because of the thank you. Yes, what he said. Yes, and I was talking to Linley earlier, and there's a song that our ceremonial grounds share, and that came from the Cherokee tribe and then moved up north, and it's more complete, with his community than it now is down south. And yesterday I took Theresa's workshop, and I am an extremely beginning kindergarten level weaver, but I always had a problem when I needed to make a certain formation of skipping. And I found out after, maybe most of my life of not understanding, you skip 2, not 1. And so it's been wonderful, and has enhanced the whole experience, and having people to talk about what we're doing. And actually, I think all of us found something similar to what we were studying and what the other person was doing. So it's been wonderful to have them.
Well, for me, tremendous impact that's having in my life. I'll say like this is like a life-changing event, and not only to come together with our brothers and sisters, Native people, which I see when I look at, when I meditate about Native people. It's really, I think and look globally, these people has ancient root that's got more than 2,000 years of history. So glad and so happy that I'm part of that. At the same time, to learn little bit about their media, the dance. For me, I don't do dance. It will be like almost having 3 feet. But Linley's work and how that's being developed, and how he has coming from the tradition, and he does multimedia work. And of course, we have a lot of common sense with Theresa, with weaving. And it's, been a tremendous experience for me. And at the same time, objects that I've seen in the collection doesn't only reassure things that we're doing, but also I'm learning a lot, and in connection with these objects, with, in my case, the textiles. I even saw some basketry, things from throughout Mexico. It's been a wonderful experience, and just really have my mind going and spinning and thinking of the next project, and how these things, influences my thoughts on my future work, and how I could develop from what I'm doing today, working with wool. And that just giving me more ideas of keep creating. I don't have to stick with the wool. I don't have to, but be true 100% with the natural that I want about my next project I'm working on. It's inspired on the petate, which is petate. It's a mat that's being woven with palm leaves. It's ceremonial object that's being used since the pre-Columbian time, and it's being used today still. And so I saw some of those objects that is woven with palm tree leaves from Oaxaca, and how I can incorporate that in my work. So it's very much inspiring.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to have a rich history and experience of interacting with other indigenous artists, not only in this hemisphere, but also Kanaka Maoli artists from Hawaii or Maori artists from New Zealand. And I've found, given that rich history of interaction and cultural sharing, that realistically we all share more in common in our worldview perspectives and our cultural histories and our foundations than those aspects of our core cultural identities separate us. And so anytime you can find yourself in an experience like this, it's always very enlightening, regardless of how many times you've had this experience, not only to be able to interact, but sometimes just to overhear conversations. And so, for instance, Porfirio was engaging in a conversation with somebody, and I don't remember where because everything's a blur, and he was talking about his experience with the designs that he utilizes, and he was relating the fact that another individual from a cultural group in the Southwest was questioning his use of designs, basically kind of challenging him and saying, hey, you've stolen our designs. And Porfirio's response was many of our historical responses in regards to contact. The Spanish brought these designs, you had contact, we had contact. Even though we're separated by a country now and a border now, they shared similar experiences that had an impact based on colonial interaction. And you find that happens a lot. I find when I have engaged conversations with my Kanaka Maoli friends or my Maori friends that we all share much more in common in regards to our indigenous worldviews and our cultural foundations. And like Maura also shared, the interaction and the dialogue that we had is a shared interaction through songs in regards to as people of the Longhouse, as Ongwe Onwe, as the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy, we've always traveled great distances, and we've always brought back different things that we appreciated. So we have a number of different social dances within our social dance repertoire, which come from other cultural groups. And I've been fortunate enough to have worked with Theresa often enough times on a number of different projects that a couple years ago when we both were serving on the same project as consultants and we were asked to bring objects that represented who we are, I said I was going to bring a basket, but I knew Theresa would bring one.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, could you just wait for the mic, because we're being webcast, so they, yeah,
Hi.
thanks.
My name's Jackie Leiden, and I actually do a podcast and an NPR series on clothing as culture that we call The Seams. And in fact, right now we're looking at Seminole Indian patchwork and looking at the Seminole tribe of Florida through their patchwork. So I'm so excited to be here today, and you've all been so inspiring in your different ways, from an urban culture to, I also went to the Central Valley last year and worked with a Mexican designer who works with the indigenous, Carla Fernandez.
Oh, yeah.
So that kind of comes to, it's a lot, thanks about me, I didn't mean to chat about me, but I'm trying to think about that. You know, it's very sensitive where to interact with an indigenous tradition and want to see it live and not be native, you know? And maybe you could each reflect where you find that interaction helpful. I mean, I can think of this very specifically in the terms of a non-native designer working with indigenous weavers, backstrap loom weavers, and where you find it inappropriate appropriation. In other words, where someone is, you know, kind of stealing something, whether it's a pattern or a song, and where it helps enliven the tradition. Am I making myself clear? And Porfirio, I'd love it if you'd go first,
Great
because it was a
question.
really controversial piece. that we
Yeah,
did with
actually, the last, I'll say, last few months, I've been hearing more and more of designers that has this particular, has happened a lot in Mexico with the traditional clothing from a tribe in Oaxaca. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, designer from France actually copyrighted. I'm sure you might have heard of that kind of stuff. I think for me, my perspective as a native, it's that right there. That's when I think I finally an appropriate disrespectful. We always welcome designers or anybody that's interested in see what we do in the process of creating our work. Everybody's welcome. But when a designer comes, I think when they just don't understand the process and they want to push their own idea, and that's kind of where the line start, they kind of start to cross the line as they kind of lose the respect of our tradition and the methods that we create and what the symbols mean to us. Instead, they want to say, okay, I'm a designer, I want to make this, I want to do it this way, I want you to work this way. So I feel like, okay, so now I'm feeling like I'm slavery. Instead, I'm not having the opportunity to collaborate versus I'm just a mill now. I'm just that's the only time. And of course, people would come and wants to spend time with with us. Everybody's more than welcome. And I think as long as there's that respect of our culture, our beliefs, the way we live, our ceremonial events, our designs, and our work, I think there's not any problem until things like that, like copyrights and takes advantage, or in that case, now she could literally sue the community that has been doing this kind of work for more than 2,000 years ago because she copyrighted. So those are the kind of things that I do found disturbing. Otherwise, I enjoy working with any designer as long as they understand our process and our beliefs and they respect the community.
I would like to respond. Only dance is obviously a very different kind of form, but in terms of the work that I do and the work that I see others do, I'm going to answer from perhaps indigenous dancer side. When is it appropriate to be doing something traditional? Is it appropriate to put something traditional on stage? When is it appropriate to, what is contemporary dance? And in that prospect, for me, for example, I am a dancer in ceremonial dance, but that's separate. Those songs, those dances, those belong in ceremony. There are some social dances as well, but they belong in those in the cultural context. But that's not to say that if you've gone to those, maybe you noticed that everyone was moving in this circle. So you may be doing movements that have a foundation in ballet, but you find yourself always moving in a counterclockwise circle while you're on stage. So I guess my thoughts on that are, though you have your traditional, you have your cultural, and there's a place for that. But that, as a contemporary dancer, is often what inspires you to create new forms. And for me, that's the beauty of contemporary work and also the place for contemporary work.
Can I just add one more thing? What I really appreciate when someone comes, and it could be a designer, it could be a painter, sometimes artist that comes and got their own drawing, their painting, but they want it to be translated into a textile. What I really appreciate is when they come and they just fall in love with what we do, and they appreciate and respect what we do, and say, okay, this is my idea, but I want to see your own interpretation. I want to see how would you interpretate this, and work with your materials. So that's more a collaboration, and so it's something that I do appreciate a lot versus just strictly being told what to do. Instead, saying, okay, I appreciate what you're doing, your technique and your experience, and see what we could make. And I would like to see something from your end.
If I could follow up, because I think it might be for Linley and Theresa. When an art form, could be weaving, could be the beading, could be the basketry, is how do you view keeping it alive? In other words, do you keep it alive within the tradition of the community, or is it kept alive if it's taught to someone outside the community? Because I was very interested when you said that basket weaving had been an average age in the 60s, and now it's in the 40s. And I was also very interested to see this Mexican designer say to these women, if you weave a traditional garment, maybe you sell it once every 3 years to someone who wants a whole one for $900. But if you weave me this hem, and I make 900 of them, and I pay you $10 for each one, then you're going to get that much more regularly. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do you invigorate an old tradition in new ways? Theresa.
Okay, I guess I'll answer that one. Right. Well, it's interesting where we are. People have been selling baskets since about 1820 in Maine at the coast to the rusticators, they called them. People who came, in the Rockefeller family from, 1900. My great-grandmother's baskets are in that house there in Bar Harbor. And so there's always been that side to the art. But, and also when we started working with the next generation, we immediately put marketing high on the priority because, they needed to be able to have outlets to sell their art, or they're not going to go into the deep Maine woods on snowshoes and cut down an ash tree and hand pound the log to get the splints off. But at the same time, people are always innovating as well and, making the basketry their own and contemporary. I think we feel less threatened about people practicing our basketry because, the wood is hard to access. And there have been, imitations made by, I remember Longaberger Baskets came to study the work about 5 years ago, and I'm not sure how that even ended up. And, so over the years we have dealt with seeing our baskets, designs in Pier 1 imports, but in different materials. And so I'm not sure if I answered your question exactly.
Yeah, Linley, you want to finish
Yeah.
up? We have about another minute.
Yeah, there's a number of relevant parables, and I would sum it up by saying teach a man to fish. There's relevant parables in regards to anthropologists coming into our communities and documenting our songs, whether they were social, ceremonial, or medicine society. What would have happened if, rather than coming in documenting, they'd have come in and taught us how to document ourselves? And so in regards to teach a man to fish, the whole question and perspective really is capitalistic, rather than why not go into these communities and teach women business?
Right. I think that's a great point to end on. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you all for coming and being with us. We're really excited to see where you're all going and to continue the conversation because it's all works in progress. And thank you to Kevin Lewis for keeping this very vital program that's invigorating Native communities, inspiring Native artists, and then sharing it with all of us so that it gives us something to think about as well. All right, thanks and have a good rest of the day.